We collect all of that water in our lagoon. We collect all of our rainwater off of our property in our lagoon. We test that water to see exactly how many nutrients are in it and what is available in it. And we will actually apply it out onto our crops to grow the crops to feed the cows. And so it's not only water, but at that point has fertilizer in it as well, natural fertilizer from our cows. And so we're able to grow our crops. So it's fascinating. It's anywhere between 4 and 5 times is what they've kind of done some different research on to see how many times it gets recycled.
Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Hey friend, welcome back to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm Jenn Trepeck, your host and health coach, here with you every week for Wellness Without the Weirdness. And since I first met today's featured guest, I have been looking forward to this conversation. And then since that time, a lot of things have changed in the economy, in the U.S. relationship with other countries. We have a new food pyramid. All of those things kind of impact this conversation. Like every time something happened, I made a note to myself for today. So let me introduce you to our featured guest. She's a 5th-generation dairy farmer, environmental scientist, and co-host of the podcast and TV series Discover Ag. She holds a bachelor's degree in soil, water, and environmental science from the University of Arizona and spent more than a decade working as an environmental consultant for dairy farms. Through Discover Ag, she blends food, agriculture, and pop culture to make conversations about the food system accessible and engaging. Please welcome Tara Vander Dussen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited you're here. Like I said, I've been very much looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, and to your point, a lot has changed since we first talked about having this discussion and coming on the podcast. So I'm kind of excited to see where our conversation leads.
Yes, exactly. So really quick, we'll tell our members what they're getting, and then we will just get right into it. So friends, join us in the Happy Healthy Hub. Being a member of the Hub is the next best thing to working with me as your health coach. You get a recipe each week delivered to your inbox, curated articles and additional discounts from me and our partners, interview episodes like this one in full video, including some behind the scenes content, access to the community board where we can interact, ask and answer questions, and so much more. All of this, by the way, is yours for just $12 a month, or pay a year up front and you get 2 months free. So that's a year for $120. I mean, amazing. So your recipe this week is for wild mushroom and grass-fed beef meatballs, fitting with our conversation for today. It's all about that high-quality meat. And then, of course, maybe add some super high-quality cheese, too. So anyway.
I love it.
Yes, these are super yummy. Even if you're not a mushroom fan, I think you're going to like these. So to get this recipe, plus this episode in full video, access to our community chat where you can ask me anything, go to asaladwithasideofFries.com/membership. From there, you'll click subscribe now, follow the prompts to enter your payment info, create your login to access the hub and all of your benefits. Remember, you're going to asaladwithasideofFries.com/membership. This supports this podcast and this community, but more importantly, it supports your health. Okay. So, Tara, I think the place to start is maybe even understanding like the food industry versus agriculture, right? So from your perspective, what are sort of the similarities and the differences there?
Yeah, I feel like that is a big part of the conversation because I think right now online, when we're looking at food, so often it's just all lumped kind of together. And there's so many, I mean, it's obviously a huge industry. There's so many different moving parts, even within agriculture. One of the reasons we started our TV series Discover Ag is hence the name, like to discover agriculture, because even when you're within ag, it's very easy to get in like your bubble. Like I always joke, I'm like in my dairy bubble and I know about dairy, but like I'm not exposed to the rest of the different agriculture sectors all the time. And it's very similar within the food system. You know, I kind of always like to think of it as like the potato. The potato is at the farm. You know, a potato farmer grows the potato. Then that is agriculture to me. That is the farming side of things. From there, that potato may go into a restaurant and be, you know, a baked potato. It may go over to like Lay's potato chips and become a potato chip. So there's just like different sectors that like can be broken out when we're having these conversations around food.
And I think an important distinction, as you're just saying, is that like big food is essentially what happens once something leaves you.
Yes, I completely agree. And we obviously need each other. I was actually just on the account of someone that was a corn farmer who produced for Doritos. And I was like, oh, that's so cool to see that they know for a fact that's their end product. And so obviously it is like a symbiotic relationship where a lot of cases farmers don't want to be the farmer, the marketer, the direct to consumer sales. I mean, that's a shift we can definitely talk about. But in a lot of cases, we grow the product and we're going to turn it over to, the food industry where they're going to take it, package it, and get it on that grocery store shelf.
So speaking of that, right? Like a lot of times when we hear big food or the potato chip versus the baked potato, there is sort of this quality of the raw ingredient that makes such a difference. And I know you guys on your podcast, Discover Ag, did a 3-part series about pesticides. And I get that you guys are not crop farmers, but I think you're closer to this, and especially given your background, and studying soil and those kinds of things. So can you speak to a little bit of pesticides and genetically modified, or I guess now they're called bioengineered crops, and what people really need to understand about some of these things?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like a lot of times with the organic label, we'll just pick on that because it's an easy label to pick on. Most people are familiar with it. I feel like a lot of people often put it as a health stamp, and I always look at it as a farming practice. So to your point, the organic label means that you are practicing farming in a certain way. And that is obviously, again, on a variety of things. If that is in dairy, it means, your cows have to have access to pasture so many days out of the year. It can mean whether you have to have organic pesticides or, not organic pesticides, right? It's all of those conversations. And so I think that is one thing that is hard because I think people have different definitions with their terminology of what things mean. And so getting really clear on that. When we did that 3-part series, we did it specifically on glyphosate, but it was funny because even within that, a lot of times people just lump quote unquote chemicals together, and they'll lump herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, all of those things together, even though they're all very different things. And so to your point, I think one of the things to think about is GMOs, pesticides, fungicides, insecticides, all of those things, and a whole scale of other things are tools in farmers' toolboxes. And so different farmers obviously are going to use different tools, going to practice using those different tools in different ways. And I think that's what comes down to management decisions. I was actually talking to a wine grape grower recently, and they had foregone doing the USDA organic label. And I was so curious because to me, everything about their marketing plan would scream have the organic label. And they were no, we have found that for us, there is a certain time of year we need to use a certain pesticide, and it makes it so that we can use so much less in other areas by just using this single pesticide. And I found that just fascinating that they were just for our piece of land, this is what actually makes the most sense. And they were direct to consumer, a wine distributor. And so they were we just have conversations with our consumers about why we're choosing to not be organic, why we're choosing to use that quote unquote chemical. And it was just a really interesting dialogue because I think that a lot of times we try to put farming in a box, a very yes or no, yes, this, no, this, yes, regenerative, not regenerative. And that grape grower made me really think about how it's a spectrum and how farmers can make the right choices for their farm, their plot of land, and ultimately who their end consumer is.
Yeah, what you're sharing is also making me think of a few different pieces here because as a consumer, I suppose this wine company or grape grower is direct to consumer, but for many of us, if we don't necessarily live with access to a farmer's market or some of these places, how can you recommend people get some of this information?
Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation. On our podcast, we always joke that labels, I think, started out in a really good place. They were to inform consumers about what was on the product. And they very quickly took a hard left towards marketing, right? That is what we know. I mean, I feel I go into the grocery store and I look at a carton of eggs and I'm what are all of these freaking labels and what do they even mean? And so I wish there was a straightforward answer to this, but it's often a lot of nuance and a lot of conversation. I'm a conventional dairy producer. So my milk goes into the most conventional supply chain there is. A lot of our milk actually goes towards cheese, but that's a whole nother conversation because obviously with dairy, it can go into a whole host of things. And so a lot of times what I like to remind people is I don't like people to fear the food in their grocery store. I think we've gotten to a really bad place in this country where people have real fears around their food. And I was actually talking to a spear fisher, a woman who does spear fishing. And I remember asking her this exact question. I was like, how do I know what fish to buy at the grocery store? Like, cause I'm not to make a pun, but like I'm a fish out of water when it comes to buying fish at the grocery store. Like I know nothing about it. And her response really stuck with me because she said, tell me what you care about and I'll tell you how to shop. And I was like, that is fascinating, like a way to approach it. Because I don't know that there is like this is how you should shop at the grocery store for any one person. I feel like you have to take into account budget. You have to take into account like how high does environmental impact rank on your scale? How high does nutrition rank? Like, are you trying to get more protein? Are you trying to get less sugars? Like there's just like a whole host of things that people care about. And I think for me, again, going back to like that fear of food in the grocery store, I want to like get rid of that because I believe that the more people know about their food, the less they will actually fear it. And so for me, I think it would be like getting down to like, what do I care about? For example, you mentioned grass-fed. I feel like if grass-fed is important to you and it's something you're willing to pay the dollar for, in my mind, that would be something that I would be like, okay, then I'm going to buy it directly from a farmer that I can ask them all of my questions. I can know exactly what grass-fed means to them. What does grass-finished mean? Like there are, even within that terminology, there's a whole host of things. And so that may be like, if that is something you are super passionate about, then like figuring out a way to buy direct from the farmer, I think is important. And I think in this day and age, it is more accessible than ever. And then if that's not something, like maybe for you, ground beef, like maybe your family goes through pounds and pounds of ground beef, like maybe getting that grocery store budget hamburger meat is like what you want to spend your money on. And again, like I think that is like important of being able to have those choices and being able to like, I don't know, kind of understand like the value system, what matters to you, and then spending your dollar in that place.
1,000%. I was having this conversation recently about, I believe changing our food system, it's about how we spend our dollars, that the onus is not going to be on these food companies. It's on us as consumers to tell them what we want.
I 100% agree. And I think sometimes consumers get a little lost in the weeds of what they want. I was actually reading a book that was about the food system, and it was so interesting. I don't know which company it was. It was a cereal company, and I want to say it was Fruit Loops, but like I can't be for sure. But it was one of those type of cereals. And the manufacturers actually took out synthetic food dyes and they weren't as bright color. Their sales went down. And so like consumers can say they don't want XYZ, like you can put anything in place of synthetic dyes. But if the dollar doesn't show up there, food companies are going to they're going to follow the dollar, whether that's right or wrong. Like I do think that sometimes one of my favorite things to say on the podcast, and Natalie's too, is like we got to where we're at in our food system for a reason. We didn't just end up here one day. There were choices along the way made, whether it was consumers asking for lower prices, whether it was consumers asking for more convenience. So I think we have to be very intentional as consumers of being like, okay, what is it we want? I will say one caveat is a lot of times there is research on this that consumers will say they're like voting with their dollar and they are making decisions at the grocery store. And at the same time, a lot of cases, they don't know, to your point about like labels and all those things, they don't necessarily know what one thing means different than the other. And that I think is the true challenge of like directing our food system in different ways is people wanting, like having really good intentions, but maybe not fully understanding like the implications of every choice you make, like picking and choosing the tools in the farmer's toolboxes. If you are a consumer that doesn't know all about all those tools, it's really hard to like make that decision. I hope I'm saying this in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm with you because I think, again, like why we're even having this conversation is so that we can all make informed choices versus the choices based on the fear mongering or the marketing or whatever is coming at us. So kind of aligned with that, like you're a family farm.
Mm-hmm.
When we hear about the food system and factory farms and those kinds of things, like talk to us a little bit about how to understand like big ag, like big agriculture versus like a local family farm.
Man, I think this has gotten so skewed, this whole idea of the factory farm. And I don't say that to make light of it. It's just like overwhelmingly in our country, the majority of agriculture of a farm on the farm basis is family farms. I think in dairy, it's 98% of all farms are family owned and operated. I think in agriculture as a whole, it's like 94%. And I say that while also addressing there is different scale, right? Like there is like, I would be considered a larger farm. That's super common where I'm at in New Mexico. Wisconsin is going to have smaller scale farms. The further east you go, like Vermont is going to have even smaller farms. Like some of it is like geographically how things are set up and how close you are to cities and all of these different things, how much access you have to land. The flyover states are obviously famous for having a lot of land. So things are going to look different than say like heavily populated areas. And so I do think that the conversation about factory farms is interesting. I'll pick on the beef supply because I think they're an easy one to pick on. I think the average herd size of a cattle rancher in the United States, a cow-calf operation, which is what you think about when you think about like a family cattle ranch, is less than like 100 head of cattle, which is relatively very small. But then at the same time, I think consumers so often hear about like the big packers, and that is, 4 companies have over 80% of the market supply of actually packaging up the beef and shipping it to the grocery store. And so again, it goes back to what we started this entire conversation on is the different segments throughout the food system, whether it be the farm, the packaging plants, and then moving up into the actual like food supply system. And so that is probably one of the things I hope we dispel is that idea of the factory farm. There is different scale, obviously, across everything. But like, I think that there is so much rhetoric online that it makes people think that that there is no family farms and that it's all like factory farms. And a lot of times on the podcast, we'll actually interview farmers. I interviewed a potato farmer. I'm going to pick on a potato farmer again. Sorry, potato farmers, twice in one episode.
We love a good potato around here. So,
yeah, that's true. It's a side of fries. So
Right.
That's a great one. And so I asked him, I was like, oh, how can we tell our listeners to like buy your potatoes? And he was like, go to the grocery store and buy potatoes. And it was such a like aha moment for me a little bit that I was just like, so often we're like, oh, where can we get it? Where can we buy it from your website? And it's like, family farms provide the grocery store with food also. And there's a lot of other systems in there with imports and exports and all of those complicated things. But like this farmer was like, there's no place you can buy my potatoes besides just at the grocery store, And he was just a family farm. He's not, quote unquote, a factory farm. And so I think we like lose sight of that in a lot of the online rhetoric.
Yeah. And I want to talk more about kind of the quality piece of it, because I always say quality matters. And then also the implications, like you're saying, of the imports and exports and what that looks like for the family farm. Because I think it's this whole like agriculture and I hate using the phrase food system, but you know what I mean? And like the food supply is such a microcosm of our little individual lives in the grand scheme of things too, and that interplay.
You wanted to talk about quality, so maybe we can start there and we can get into the bigger conversation.
Let me pause here to highlight our partner for the episode, and then we're going to come back for that.
Perfect.
Excellent. Let me ask you something. Have you ever done all the right things, in air quotes, for your health and still felt confused and frustrated, or like it just shouldn't be this hard? Like you're constantly starting over, waiting for it to finally click or stick? That stuck feeling? It's not a motivation problem. It's definitely not a willpower problem, even though that's what you always ask me. It's what happens when health is built on rules instead of on understanding. So that's exactly why I wrote Uncomplicating Wellness. Not to tell you what to eat, how to move, or what to eliminate. Rather to help you understand how to think about wellness for yourself. Just like this conversation. What matters to you? What doesn't? And how to stop outsourcing your trust. It's science, context, and sanity without the pressure to do everything perfectly. If you want wellness to feel clearer, calmer, and more sustainable, Uncomplicating Wellness, the book, is for you. Text the word book, B-O-O-K, to 833-801-0500 to learn more. Again, text the word book to 833-801-0500. Okay, Tara, let's talk about quality.
Okay. So I feel like I'm going to pick on dairy for once since I'm in dairy and it's an easy one for me to talk about. But I feel like I always get asked about like organic versus regular. And again, like I think of it as the organic being like on the farming side. But some of the things that I think, I'll shout out for the conventional side is, we're held to the same, like across the board, no matter what happened when a tanker of milk leaves a farm. There are certain things that are just across the board standard quality. So we have a number of different things we test for on our farms that relate to quality, even on conventional side. So, a lot of times people ask about like antibiotics. On a conventional dairy, we are able to give our cows antibiotics if they're sick. It's prescribed by a vet. We have a vet that comes out once a week and does herd health checks. And when that cow is on antibiotics, she is actually milked in a separate like milking pen. And she has a withdrawal period. So she has a point where we have to continue milking her after she has received antibiotics until they've cleared her system before she can enter back into like the food supply system, her milk can. And I think that's a really important thing that doesn't get talked about all the time. And then every single tanker of milk is tested actually for antibiotics to the parts per trillion. And so it's not only tested at the farm, it's actually tested again at the plant and then throughout processing. Milk is one of the most tested products. It's actually really fascinating when you get into all of it.
Why is that?
I think it's like an easy thing to test, right? Like if you think about another product, like if you were to test an apple, you'd be testing that like single apple, where in a tank of milk, you're able to take like what would it be called? Like a
representative sample.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. A representative sample of that entire tanker. And so it's just a really easy thing to test. So yeah, I mean, before a tanker of milk leaves our farm, it's tested. If it instantly like comes back with information, if it does not pass the test, we actually like the milk will then be dumped and we have to pay for it. So it is like very serious for that to happen in our farm. And so obviously every gallon of milk on the shelf is free from antibiotics. Again, it's the farming practice. Organic does not ever give their cows antibiotics. And again, if that's important to you, organic is a great option. If that is something that's not as important to you, maybe conventional milk is the right option for you. And so those are some of the differences. But as far as quality, I love to share that as I'm a fifth generation dairy farmer. So like I have been in this a long time, I have a long family history of it. Milk quality has never been higher than it is now. Like we do a phenomenal job of caring for our cows. And that's across the board, organic, conventional. On our farm, as well as most farms, we actually have a nutritionist for our cattle that plan all of their meals depending on what stage of life they're in, which a lot of people think that's wild, but it's really down to a science of making sure they're getting the right combination of, fats, proteins, vitamin, minerals. On a more basic level, that's making sure they get the right combination of grasses and vitamins and all, whatever is available to us. I do joke that cows are the most local eaters there are because they eat whatever is local to them. So yeah, so they're going to be eating whatever is nearby them. So we feed actually a lot of cottonseed. We're in cotton country, being close to Texas. And cottonseed is a leftover seed from making cotton, like the cotton we wear. And the seed has a lot of protein. And so it's a great thing to be able to feed cows. And so again, that probably isn't getting fed in other places, but that's what's local to us. Next month, we're actually going out to a citrus farm in Florida for Discover Ag TV series to unpack exactly how an orange goes from farm to the packaging plant. And one of the things we are hoping we get to talk with the farmer about is like in the case of Florida, a lot of times cattle are fed leftover citrus peels for making orange juice. And so it's just like super fascinating. And again, having that nutritionist that can balance like, okay, we're feeding citrus peels. What does that look like in a healthy diet for a cow is super critical and important.
I love how like regional it is. And yet it's so lost in the conversation when we hear about these things.
For sure. It definitely is. And like, I don't know, I compare it to any other industry you don't know anything about. Like I always joke, like, I don't know anything about the banking industry and yet I use the bank regularly, right? Like I have no idea how when I swipe my credit card and it pays for something and then somebody direct deposits money. Like, there's so many industries in this day and age, so much technology, so much going on. It's impossible for every person to know every back end of everything that's going on. I don't know how my cell phone works. Like I don't know how my car works, And so it is really like, and yet at the same time, I think food is so personal to people. It's literally what you serve on your table. And so you don't want to be told that like you don't know anything about it and you don't want to feel that way about it. And so I think there's the long running conversation that consumers are more removed from agriculture than ever before. And so to me, it's not surprising that now we're trying to circle back and learn more. But when I give a keynote speech, I actually have a slide that shows a picture of my grandfather hand milking cows in Holland. And then it has a modern day milking barn. And for me, when you think about how far removed people are from agriculture, most people are grandparents, great grandparents removed from the farm. And it's really hard to catch people up on 75 years of history in an instant, right? So you may have a picture of your family somewhere of your grandfather hand milking cows. And if you walk into my barn today, you're going to be like, whoa, how did we get here? And so I think that's what I consider like our job now in agriculture is people are asking questions. They do want to know where their food comes from. So how do we catch them up to where we're at now? Just like our cell phone doesn't look like the old rotary phone, right? But like, how did we get here? Like imagine waking up and the last phone you saw was like a dial phone and now we have a cell phone, right? Like, and I kind of think agriculture's in that position now to say, okay, we have all these people asking questions. We have all this technology of social media to show people, but like it looks completely different than the last time they took a look at agriculture.
And to your point, it doesn't necessarily mean better or worse, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of times when our barns and our farms and our fields look different, the equipment we use looks different, it can be very jarring. I mean, there's a lot of research showing people don't love like technology in relation to food, right? Like that's not something that they love hearing about. And in some cases, it's a really good thing. I said, milk quality has never been better. I would say animal welfare has never been better than it has today, talking about, vets on site, so much more transparency between things, just a level of demand from our processors because of our consumers that we're held to really high standards. And I think those are all really good things. So I always like tell people when you come, like you're going to be surprised, but I hope you leave being surprised in like a really great way. And that's what we found. We do a lot of actually on-farm tours on our farm. And it's almost always like people just leave with feeling so much better about knowing where their food comes from. And so it's one of those things I wish everyone could have that experience with lots of food sectors because again, the more you know, I think the less you fear your food.
Yeah. How standard is that, by the way, like with the nutritionists and the vet and all of those kinds of things, like for dairy and then also like Natalie is, a cattle rancher. Yeah,
my co-host is a cattle rancher. I would say standard. Most farms, you have to have a vet, obviously. Majority of farms also have a nutritionist. It's funny when I started sharing online, so I'm very much not on the cow side. I always joke that I'm the back end of the dairy doing environmental work, right? Like I'm working with the cow manure, the soil, and the water. That is where my area of expertise is. And when I told my husband I wanted to start sharing on social media, which ultimately led to, hosting on a podcast, he was like, I don't know what you're going to share about. And I was like, well, I think it's fascinating. The dairy farmers like recycle their water. Like we use 1 gallon of water on our farm up to 5 times. And he was like, yeah, but everybody does that. And I was like, yeah, that's the point though. People don't know that.
Yeah, I had no idea. Really Can I ask a dumb question? How?
Oh, there's no dumb questions. Yeah, it's really cool. So the first way we use it is groundwater is typically at about 50 degrees. Milk, when it comes out of a cow, is at about 102 degrees. And so we have to cool it down to a 33, 34 degrees, like immediately. That is one of the quality things that actually has improved. I think when I was a kid, you only had to cool it down to like 45 degrees. So like, again, rules just keep getting more and more strict because we know so much more about quality control. So we actually use the groundwater to cool the milk. So they will run in pipes side by side. So the water takes the heat from the milk cools down. And then, fun fact, since that water is now heated up, it goes to our broilers to get heated even more. And it's what we use to clean the equipment. So that water hasn't touched anything, hasn't done anything. It's been heated up. We're going to heat it up even more and we're going to sanitize all of our equipment. We're going to be able to then take that water once it's sanitized equipment and flush out like the back of the barn is kind of what I would imagine. And as you can imagine, when cows are standing around, they're going to do certain things and we need to flush out to the back of the barn. And so we use that water for that. We collect all of that water in our lagoon. We collect all of our rainwater off of our property in our lagoon. There's different lagoon systems depending on where you're at in the country. I won't get into that. We test that water to see exactly how many nutrients are in it and what is available in it. And we will actually apply it out onto our crops to grow the crops to feed the cows. And so it's not only water, but at that point has fertilizer in it as well, natural fertilizer from our cows. And so we're able to grow our crops. So it's fascinating. It's anywhere between 4 and 5 times is what they've kind of done some different research on to see how many times it gets recycled.
It's amazing. And so
yeah, it's really cool.
In that, and again, maybe, I feel like you can answer this based on all the conversations you've had, like going back to sort of grass-fed versus grain-fed, especially for beef. There's always reasons why things evolved the way they did.
Mm-hmm.
What's your understanding of that, and then how that sort of plays into this quality conversation?
Yeah, grass-fed versus grain-fed is an interesting conversation. I think it's only like ramping up more and more. And I think there's still a lot we don't know. On the macro level, for milk and for beef, there's not a ton of differences in the end product as far as like nutritionally speaking. Micro level, we're learning more and more that there is like micro level changes, which I think that conversation will continue to develop and be very fascinating. I think one of the things that gets lost in this conversation is that the majority of cattle in this country spend up to 2/3 of their life out on pasture. So I talked about cow-calf operations. Those are what you think of as the family cattle ranches. In most cases, the most efficient way to feed those cattle is out on pasture. So they are out on grass for the majority of their life. Then towards the end, like the last 1/3 of their life, they are going to be sold to the packing plants, essentially a feedlot. And that is where usually grain will get more introduced into their diets. And again, that's, the final months before they're going to be packaged and show up at your grocery store. And so I think that's something that a lot of times when people think about grain versus grass-fed, they think that like this grain-fed animal has been, grain-fed its, entire life. It's never seen a piece of grass. And that's usually not the case at all. And then with grain-fed, again, this is where labeling is crazy. Grain-fed or grass-fed doesn't necessarily mean pasture-raised. It just simply means they were grass-fed, which I think that's where I get into like, if you really want to get into those like minute details of a cow's diet before it ends up, in your fridge or freezer, I think the direct to consumer option is amazing because then you can ask all of those questions of like, what does the life cycle of your cattle look like before it gets packaged? Again, I think a lot of times it comes down to people having, different preferences, different budgets, so many different things. But even those cattle that are receiving grain, they continue to receive grass. They do have a nutritionist that's working with them that understands, ruminant animals and how their different stomachs function and be able to process those different ingredients.
And grass finished, because you mentioned that earlier. So grass finished is then even sort of that last third of that.
So I feel like grass finish started with the conversation because of the fact that a lot of cows start out on grass. And so the grass finish would be grass finish versus grain finish. So in most cases, a lot of the cattle in this country starts out all the same, again, at those cow-calf operations out on pasture. And so then the finishing, quote unquote, is what changed. And so that terminology is like grass finish means they continued to be fed grass all the way till the end.
Yeah. And so
it's kind of confusing. I hope that made sense.
It totally
and I'm
makes
explaining
sense.
This as a dairy farmer and not a cattle rancher. So whenever Natalie, the very first dairy cow she saw in real life was when she came to my farm. And so that just tells you that like how even within ag, we can get so segmented. She grew up in Montana. They don't have very many dairies in Montana. And so it's really interesting how, I feel like when you're a farmer, you get your blinders on for your little, sector of the industry.
Yeah, so I want to take this sort of more macro.
Okay.
We've talked about the food system, the food supply, imports, exports. For you, or you and Natalie, how has all of this impacted you? What do you see as the impact on the individual farmer?
Yeah. I think that we are like 4 years in now to this podcast, and it has very much opened my eyes to so many different things. I mean, every single week on our podcast, essentially we pick 4 trending topics, that are happening online. And then Natalie and I research them and we have a conversation on our podcast about them. And so I spend a lot of my time researching things in the food industry, food system, agriculture that are so outside of anything I would have ever learned about. And it has taught me very quickly how nuanced these conversations are and how much ins and outs there are. So, you mentioned imports and exports. I find that such an interesting conversation. Natalie's favorite fact on the podcast that she has learned to date is that 9 out of 10 avocados come from Mexico and the United States. And that poses real challenges to our farmers here in the United States. At the same time, there was a time not that long ago where you only had avocados at certain times of the year. They weren't something you had every single day. And we as consumers, I'm going to lump myself into this too, realized how much we loved them. We wanted them all times of the year. We wanted them no matter where we lived in the country. And so we started importing avocados. And we realized, obviously Mexico realized this United States was an amazing market. And so they started importing avocados. Avocados can be made cheaper in Mexico. That is just, like a fact that there is, to this. And that is really hard on our avocado farmers here in the United States. If Mexico decides to flood the market, it is going to have a huge impact on avocado farmers here. And we actually interviewed one of our episodes right now on our TV series over on YouTube, Discover Ag on the Road is where you can find it. We actually interview an avocado farmer, and she talks about some of the challenges that, imports and exports face. And I remember when I was a young kid, the price for milk went way down. And I remember asking my dad, like, why? And he was like, well, like New Zealand flooded the market. And I was like a young kid. And I was like, what does New Zealand have to do with like our market here in the United States? And I'm sure his answer it was probably much more complicated than his single line answer to me. But we are in a global market is the point of this. And it makes it very complicated. As dairy farmers, we're exporting anywhere from 15 to 20% of our milk to other countries. So I obviously feel passionate about exports to other countries. We export a lot to Mexico. At the same time, I'm also aware of, how the impact of imports coming in here on our farmers. And so it is such a complicated system. And again, like I hate that I feel like I haven't given you straightforward answers on any of the questions, but I think that leads to the fact that it's not a very straightforward system. And we've gotten to where we're at again for a reason, that we as consumers want what we want all times a year at the grocery store, no matter where we're located. And so it creates a system that it is complicated to be able to supply consumers with those. We actually spoke at South by Southwest at the food track. And when we were researching for that, I think they said like less than 4 decades ago, there was only 40 products, at the grocery store, whatever it was, not very many, less than 1,000 products at a grocery store in the middle, like if you were in rural America. And nowadays there's tens of thousands of products at every grocery store in the country. And it's just kind of wild that that's the world we live in. And going back to imports and exports, a lot of that is because of imports and exports and being able to bring products from around the world to us on any given day.
Yeah. Do you guys see the impact of tariffs or changes like on your local farm? Like when these things are in the headlines and whatever, like I have to imagine that at some point ends up like you directly feel it.
Yeah. And I will say, this would be a conversation I feel like for a soybean farmer right now to come on here and say, so I'll relate it back to dairy. I know so many times in my life where grocery store prices have been really high for milk and milk prices have been really low. And that sometimes the system, it is so complicated that it's not always like directly. Like I don't know how many times I've been standing in a grocery store and someone grabs a gallon of milk and being like, dairy farmers must be doing really good right now. And I'm like, oh, our prices are really low, there's so many other factors at play. Like milk is a great example of that. A lot of times milk is a loss leader in the grocery store. So they'll market for less than it's worth because it's what brings people in the grocery store. There's a reason milk's in the back of the grocery store. It's because if you're out of milk, you're going to go to the grocery store and get milk. That is like a fact of life, it seems like. And it's a marketing ploy that grocery stores know. So they're going to have you walk by every single thing they can have you walk by to get those loss leaders in the grocery store. So again, going back to whether it's direct or indirect, yes, there's absolutely cases where the market is a direct impact on farmers and they feel it absolutely at their core. And it is really difficult. We are in a really difficult time in agriculture right now. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. And at the same time, there's lots of cases where things are very indirect and very hard to pinpoint of why markets are moving in certain ways or why prices are going certain ways. And so that is, again, another complication within our food system.
Yeah. And it's like, we're certainly not going to solve the world's food supply and this food system here. But I think to help everybody understand that so much of our food is local and there's so much that goes into creating that food source, even if it isn't marketed to us, even if it isn't on that label or those kinds of things. And we talked about food choice, being able to not feel afraid of the food in your store. Anything else that I know we could talk for ages, but anything else we missed or a final thought to wrap this up?
Yeah, I think my final thought to your point, we're not going to fix the whole food system. It's very complicated. But I think that something that's very important is I don't know if 10 years ago I would have had the chance to come on a podcast like this. I think we're in such a unique experience where people, again, are asking the questions. They do want to know where their food comes from. And I genuinely, and maybe this is naive of me, I don't think anything bad can come out of that. I believe that having conversations, opening up the dialogue leads to better decisions. And that is an important place to be. And I think if you looked at 10 years ago, all farmers were doing was asking, how do we connect with consumers? How do we bridge that gap? I don't know how many conferences I sat through. And it's like, I feel like COVID was a huge accelerator in this conversation, and we've only continued to ramp it up since then. So now we're 6 years into that. And that's actually, I think, a really positive that's come out of that is people started asking questions. They started asking about the food supply system. They asked where their food came from. And I really believe the more conversations we can have, the better. And so I think that like in that case, like I think the future is really bright. I think that we can make changes within our food system by having people ask questions, have conversations, not to end like on a political note, but I think that in the political landscape, one of the things I'm excited about is at least people are talking about food and farming on a national scale. You mentioned the food pyramid at the beginning of this, like if it's right or wrong or indifferent, I'm just glad we're having conversations, I guess is where I'm at, because I think those conversations are really important and they do bridge that gap because that gap is huge. People are more removed from agriculture. And the only way we can overcome that is by having conversations and bringing up questions. And so like you said, this is a stupid question. I am really at the point in my life that I'm like, there is not a stupid question because let's just ask them. Like, let's get them out there. I mean, I'm going to go learn about stone crab next week in Florida. And I guarantee I'm going to be asking, mine too. I'm so excited, but I guarantee I'm going to ask all the stupid questions, which is terrible. It's one of my favorite foods. I should know more about it. And so I think that that's the best place to start is asking stupid questions and just having these conversations.
I love it. Well, and I'm so grateful for your perspective and everything you've brought to us to help us learn more and have these conversations. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was so much fun.
Absolutely. All right, really quick before I lose you, a rapid fire off topic questions.
Okay,
all right.
Great.
What's the best thing you've done for your health this week? What's the naughtiest thing you've done related to your health this week? Like the salad and fries.
I think my answer might be the same. The
Perfect.
best thing I've done for this week is I have been really, really trying to completely eliminate alcohol from my diet. Just, I don't know when this airs, but we are going into Lent, which I always think is a time of reflection, no matter what your religious background is of like, what can I, we have dry January, we have all these things that are just, and so I've been like, really like, no, I don't need that single glass of wine at night. Though, what was the next question? Like the worst thing I've done for my health is last night I was like, no, I'm having 2 glasses of wine while I take a hot bath. And so that's what I did. And it was just what I needed. So I feel like there are 2 sides to every coin.
I love it. All right. If you weren't a dairy farmer, what would you do?
Oh my goodness. So I actually went to school for environmental, obviously agriculture, and I thought I was going to be environmental lawyer. So I guess that's what I would do maybe in a different world, but the farm and the farm life was calling me back. And so I very much am glad where I ended up. But I think there is an alternate universe where I went on and pursued that degree.
Favorite book on any topic other than your area of expertise, or you could give us a fiction book.
I feel like I have so fallen into the trap of most millennial women where I got so into reading, all the books that were helping you grow your business, self-help, all of those things, which were amazing and were so needed at the time of my life in like 20s, early 30s. And now I've just gone so far the other direction. I think I've fallen into the ACOTAR, the Court of Thorn and Roses, where I brought back just reading for enjoyment. And so I try to now balance my books with my audiobooks are for growing my business, self-help, and then my actual like physical reading books are whatever fiction book is hot on, book talk right now.
I used to do the same thing. And then now I'm just all audiobook. If you could cure one ailment, disease, or sickness, what would it be?
I don't know if there's one. I feel like we've been talking about food this whole time. Obviously, this is a food podcast, but I believe in like whole foods, talking about the grocery store. A lot of times for me, my shopping involves just trying to pick a variety of whole foods. Obviously, I'm a busy mom like everyone else. There's definitely a granola bar in my car that is, processed food, quote unquote. But I would say like those metabolic diseases, I think we can do so much with just our diets and our whole foods. And, as a person who suffers from high blood pressure personally, I know that's something I am constantly trying to think about is like what choices I'm making with what I'm eating. And while I am a firm believer in modern medicine and I'm on medication for my high blood pressure, I do try to think about like what whole foods can I pick that can supplement what modern medicine is also doing.
Amazing. If you were a superhero, what would be your superpower?
Oh my gosh, this is easy. I wish I could like transport to different places. Well, I don't know what
Teleport.
that's called.
Me too. That's my, yeah.
Teleport. Thank you. I want to be like right now, my sister has a young baby and she is 1,000 miles away. And I'm like, I just wish I could just show up for an afternoon and hang out with you guys and then come back to my real life.
For sure. What's your biggest pet peeve?
I think maybe the people that don't change. I don't know if that is like too broad, but like I really love when people grow and develop. And I hate when you talk with someone and they're like still in the same place. I'm like, okay, so you don't like this about yourself. How do we fix it? How do we grow? How do we change? And so I know that's like not a pet peeve as in like, people smacking their lips or like chewing too bad, but it is something that does really drive me crazy.
I get it. All right, last one. In your opinion, what's the next frontier in wellness?
Oh my gosh. We were just talking about this on the podcast, actually, that we were joking about the protein craze, that everything is protein right now. Yeah. And we were talking, I do think it's like here to stay, but I have decided the new frontier can like foods kind of like stay in their lane. Like I don't need a protein popcorn, but I'm super excited about my high protein yogurt, right? Like I'm kind of like, can we have foods like if you're wanting popcorn, do it for the enjoying it. It's a fun snack. You're at the movies or you're enjoying movie, time at home or whatever the food you want to place that. But I would love to see foods like
just be what they are.
Yes, be what you are.
Agreed. I'm like, you don't have to have protein in your coffee. It's okay.
No, but like, I'm not going to lie. I love the high protein yogurts,
right.
Like, I'm like, that makes sense. There was already protein there to begin with.
Right. Love it. Well, thank you. Tara Vander Dussen. Tell everybody how to connect with you, where to learn more, and stay in touch with everything you guys are doing.
Yeah, if you're a podcast person, obviously listening to this, we'd love it if you'd hop over to Discover Ag Podcast. A new episode launches every Thursday. We cover trending topics in the food and ag, and we make it very relevant. It is not like an agriculture podcast. We're not going to be talking about markets. We're going to be very much talking about what's trending right now and just bringing a farmer focus to it. And then we'd love to have you over on YouTube. Our new YouTube series is Discover Ag on the Road. And every month we drop a new episode. We've discovered oysters, we've discovered finger limes, avocados. And then, as I said, we're going to Florida. We're going to be looking at citrus and a couple different fish, crab options as well. And taking you from farmer perspective all the way what happens on farm, all the way through the processing.
Love it. Awesome. All right. And friends, on Friday in this week's bite-sized bonus episode, we're talking about stuff. It's a bit of an acronym. What does it stand for? I know you're curious. What's it supposed to remind us to do? I'll fill you in on Friday and this week's bite-sized bonus episode. Be sure wherever you're listening, click the plus sign or the follow button so that your app will alert you on Friday morning when it goes live. Well, as always, everybody, I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I am at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideoffries.com. Pick your platform, send a message. I truly love hearing from you, your ideas, your takeaways, your questions. This is also the easiest way to learn more about working with me as your health coach. Tara Vander Dussen, thank you again for joining us. And friend, if you are not already a member, join us in the Happy Healthy Hub. You'll go to asaladwithasideoffries.com/membership. This shows your support for this podcast, this community, and above all, supports your health. On top of this week's episode in full video with behind the scenes content, your 24/7 Ask Me Anything on the community board, you'll get this week's recipe for wild mushroom and grass-fed beef meatballs. Until next week, everybody, it's all about intentionally choosing your food and its sources. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.